Hi, I'm Vered, and I'm one of the coordinators of the Jewish Student Union on campus.
And I'm Elisheva.
Also a coordinator,
yes.
yeah.
Before we begin, we just wanted to acknowledge that the Evergreen State College sits on traditional lands of the Medicine Creek Treaty Tribes, which include the Saxwin Island, the Nisqually Indian Tribe, and the Puyallup Tribes of Indians. All who are not Salish peoples are visitors here. With this awareness, we pay respect to elders past and present of the Medicine Creek Tribes and all Native peoples.
We'd also like to make some thank yous. Thank you to Nancy, who couldn't be here right now. Thank you to Sam, and thank you to Aryeh for driving to the airport. Also thank you to Rabbi Seth and Temple Beth Tefillo for your support on this. We also know that there are a couple college administrators who came to this event tonight, and we wanted to thank you. If you are a college administrator, if you want to raise your hand just a little bit. There we go, yeah, all right. There might be some more coming in because of Evergreen time, but we're really thankful that you guys came to show a commitment to dialogue and communication on campus.
So like Vered said, we represent the JSU. We're the two co-coordinators, which is the Jewish Student Union here on campus. And so what the JSU is we're politically, we're non-affiliated. We're a multi-denominational student organization. We're dedicated to fostering Jewish community across political divides, encouraging allyship, and upholding the principle of tikkun olam, or repairing the world.
So we're really excited to have this opportunity to welcome Antoine and Rabbi Hanan to the Evergreen community so we can talk about bridging divides within our community and compassionate activism. So without further ado.
A little further ado.
More further ado.
Well, we just wanted to say we know that this is a very sensitive topic. We know that there's a lot of opinions in this room, a lot of people in different places on the political spectrum. So we just wanted to say that you're probably going to encounter ideas that you don't agree with or that you're not familiar with, no matter where you stand. So we want to encourage you to try to hear our speakers out. And there will absolutely be a time for Q&A at the end. And also, if you want to further the discussion, we're holding a debriefing session on this event this coming Tuesday at 5 p.m. So there will be many opportunities to continue talking about this, to continue sorting out what we all think.
Great. On campus, SEM2B1107 is for the debriefing event. So.
Thank you again for being here, and without further ado, we'll invite up our speakers.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. If my voice is not loud enough, please let me know as to raise it. So I guess everyone can hear me, right? Okay. My name is Antoine Sokka, and just before I start, I do have a small question. With a small raise of hand, has any one of you had the experience of living under what we know as a military rule? Anyone lived under a military regime? Military control? Okay, so we'll have something to talk about tonight. So my name again is Antoine Sokka, and I come from Bethlehem. I was born in 1984, not 48, the last two digits, switch them. Two different stories, at least as I thought. And you come to a point to learn that it's all interconnected in a way. And I was born in Jerusalem, raised and lived my whole life in Bethlehem. And I was born into a family that was not politically active, was not religiously active, was not socially active, culturally Christians, as you say in the US, nominally Christians, Catholics. And my family was actually a family that worked in the tourism industry, an industry that is more or less the petroleum of that region. And that meant that in the space that my family business operated, an environment at that time, and again, this is a time before any peace attempt was made, it meant that I would encounter a lot of Israelis in daily basis. At that era, the tourism industry was mainly dominated by the Israeli side, and that meant on daily basis, again, I encountered Israelis. Now, the majority of those Israelis who I met were Mizrahi Jews, Everyone familiar with the term Mizrahi Jews? Anyone does not know it? Okay, I'll explain it shortly. Mizrahi Jews is a label given to the Jewish communities that immigrated to the land, whether from Morocco up to Iraqi-Irani borders. Now, what does that mean? That means that they spoke my language, that they would tell me jokes in my own language when I was a kid, that they would make coffee or food or heat their food in the kitchen of the business office, that food and coffee that smelled like my mom's food and coffee. So when you're growing up as a kid and you're coming to that space where you're encountering the other who has similar culture, you're not seeing a difference, and therefore I had a gap era in my life. You're maybe familiar with the concept of a gap year here. I had a gap era in my childhood where I met the Jewish community without a lens of another. Now that was an amazing bubble that had to come to an end. By 1987, the first Palestinian uprising started. And I was a baby at 4 years old, 5 years old. But slowly at that time, I started realizing that there was something wrong in the environment around me. My family's business was located 50 meters away from Rachel's tomb. Are you familiar with Rachel's tomb and where it's located? So Rachel's tomb is a Jewish holy site that is found on the entrance of Bethlehem, between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And just right behind Rachel's tomb, there is a refugee camp called Aida Refugee Camp that hosted 8,000 Palestinians then, at least. And that meant basically that that area was an area where clashes used to be part of the daily scenery. So in the space of my family's business, I started encountering those scenes where you are exposed to violence, whether it is stone throwing, Molotov cocktail throwing, or live ammunition, tear gas, rubber bullets, all that kind of scenes that introduce you to a reality of violence around you. That was the point that I realized there is something not normal in this picture in front of me, but I didn't actually understand what was happening. And luckily and unluckily, my family also lived next to Bethlehem University. We are in university right now, university youth. We want to change the world, We go out, adrenaline. We want to do anything that the system says no. And at that time, the no was that you as a Palestinian, myself and others, were not allowed to raise a Palestinian flag or sing the Palestinian anthem. It was prohibited under military orders, military rules that we live under. And so it meant that the students would go out and graffiti the Palestinian flag or the lyrics of the Palestinian anthem. 20 minutes later, there would be an Israeli jeep parked in front of our house, and the whole scene of violence would erupt again. Now, what was very interesting about that experience specifically was that the reality, it was the first time that I was able to realize that there is someone a bit different than me in this land. It was the first space that I heard Hebrew in. I could hear the soldiers due to the proximity to where they parked in front of our house. I could hear the soldiers talking to each other in Hebrew. So yeah, I got to introduce to the reality that there's someone different than me and that there is this conflict that we live in. Luckily and unluckily, this did not stay for too long. 1994, 1995, Oslo was signed, and everyone got on the high of peace. Even me as a kid then, I remember coming to the point where I was realizing that there is this prolonged conflict between Palestinians and Israelis that, in a sense, was coming to an end. The live broadcast of the images of the signatory in the backyard of the White House, where we had the two leaders who most wanted to kill each other, Rabin and Arafat, coming to a point where they are shaking hands and signing a primary treaty, let's say. That brought majority on both sides to a high. I remember peers in Bethlehem, where they went out after the Israeli jeeps as they were redeploying out of Bethlehem, throwing rice on them. We throw stones, but we also throw rice as a sign of celebration. So people were on that high of peace. People were witnessing in their life a moment of history, in a sense. And at that point, a lot of groups started bringing Israelis and Palestinians to meet for the first time, meeting the other and trying to make peace with the other. And that was a nice experience. It wasn't the first time that I would meet Israelis but it was a nice experience, an amazing experience to be part of this movement of civil society that was happening on the ground that wanted to bring about peace. And generally we would meet and talk about who's worse, an Arab mom or a Jewish mom in force feeding, because we have that in common. What kind of music you like, what kind of movies we like. Whenever it would come to the core issues of the conflict, we would be told not to worry about it, that the politicians are taking care of it, and that all what we have to do as civil society is just to show how much we love each other and how much we can coexist and have peace among each other. To a great extent on both sides, people believed in their politicians and trusted their politicians. So in reality, we didn't dig deep into those issues. Meanwhile, if you look at the media and the headlines in the news at that era, you would realize, if you look at it right now, that every politician was giving their own people the message that we're going out of this as winners. We're not giving up anything, we're not losing, we're actually coming out with from the negotiations as winners. So what happened basically is that people were not prepared to understand, were not prepared to pay the price tag, and they were not aware of what is that price tag for peace. Everyone wanted peace, but nobody talked about the price tag for peace. And we slowly realized that this is not working, and it blew up in our faces. The year 2000, 2001, we realized that the peace process is not working out, and the second Palestinian uprising started. And the second Palestinian uprising started all over the West Bank, and it did take a dramatic turn where it became militarized. And at that time, I was old enough to go to university, and watching too much American TV taught me that, maybe if you become a lawyer, you can make a good argument, therefore, push peace forward. And I went to Jenin, to the Arab American University in Jenin, to study law, as to become a lawyer. I finished law, but I never became a lawyer, thankfully. And at that time, in that space, I realized that I couldn't talk about peace anymore. In Jenin, an area that had a very hard militarization scene, being exposed to dead bodies and blood and hard and deep militarization on a daily basis was part of the normal scenery. So even trying to talk about peace there was almost impossible. People were in pain on both sides, and we saw more and more how this civil peace camp dissolved in a sense, and people started caving in due to the pain and the fear on each side. So like many, I chose to take care of myself and find a way to put this load of peace, this responsibility of peace on someone else. Like any human, we would blame it on someone. And I blamed it on politicians. And I said, politicians got us to this situation. Let them find a way to get us out of the situation. And for almost 2.5 years, I kicked back, relaxed, blamed politicians, and said that I cannot do anything with this. 2.5 years into the process, I had a day where we were traveling from Bethlehem to Jenin. 32 students in the same day they would travel. And I would be in the first car, and behind me there would be another 5 cars or 6 cars carrying the other Palestinians from Bethlehem. They would choose to travel in the same day that I would travel, not because I'm sexy, just simply because I speak Hebrew. Because I learned Hebrew from Sesame Street growing up as a kid, watching again too much TV. And that meant that I would come to a checkpoint and could be able to engage in a conversation. And we'll get to it a bit. And that day specifically, when we were stopped on the checkpoint, the soldier opened the door of the car that I was in, pulled me out of the car, put his rifle in my forehead, and excuse my language, he asked me to say that he is a son of a bitch. He didn't ask to see my ID card. He didn't ask to search my bag. He asked me basically to commit verbal violence. Consciously, subconsciously, if you grow up in a conflict region, you come to realize that just like how it applies in science and physics, whether every action has a reaction, that also applies to human beings. And submitting to his request of using verbal violence wasn't something that I did, I rejected. But in the same moment, I was also conscious that I was rejecting a military order. When you hear Palestinians talking about occupation, that is a big term. If you look beneath it, you'll find what does it mean in the daily life of people. Palestinians are subjected to military rule and military orders. And as we grow up, we understand from those orders that if you are given an order by a person in uniform upon military law, you don't have a space to negate. You are to basically follow. So I was rejecting his order with being fully conscious that I'm rejecting a military order. Now, he got sick of the game after pushing 2-3 times on my forehead with his rifle and put me back in the car, and we drove away. It took me a couple of minutes to digest what was happening there. And I came to realize that the very reality that those students would travel in the same day that I would travel, just because I understand Hebrew, and just because I know the other with a different lens, meant responsibility. Just knowing the other and that level, that power of knowledge, sets you with responsibility. And on the same level, I realized that if it was my brother in my shoes, things could have ended up differently. Why? Because the experience that I had in my life is very different than my younger brother, who who's younger than me and didn't have the same experience that I had. And his experience is basically built on the conflict as it is, the settler and the soldier as the two only images that he have of the other. Now I realized that I could not continue blaming politicians from that space and could not continue kicking back and relax. And I decided to go back into activism. And at that moment, at that time, there was a movement that was growing slowly in the West Bank and on the other side also, that was known as the One Voice movement. A movement that was based on two separate entities working parallelly but separately in their own communities to propel their leaders to bring about peace, for pushing forward the two-state solution. And that was an amazing experience, a new high in my life. Because at that time of despair and hopelessness, where people were observing a lot of pain around them, we did need something to remind us that actually we, as people, as masses, do matter. And that it's actually our will that politicians should follow and not their election interest only. And on both sides, for 7 years, I did work and serve with this movement. And both sides of the divide, we did carry town hall meetings and events where we would talk about that price tag of peace. And during the time that I served with them, I met the organization that I also work at right now, called Holy Land Trust. And I met them through a leadership training that they published an ad for. And the ad read, Nonlinear Leadership Training. And I didn't understand what it meant. I went online, Googled nonlinear, or what I could understand that it is not the normal pattern. And for me, as a kid then, as a youth then, it meant, we don't have a normal situation. Why not have a not normal leadership thinking? And I'm not going to tell you it's a new science. It's basically things that we've been inheriting from all respectful communities around the world, where it is teaching people consciousness in their life. But it's framed in a business methodology for people of the 21st century, the mind that we have. And it teaches individuals to realize that life consists of 3 domains, past, present, and future. And that when you have a vision that you want to achieve in the future, you should look at the past, honor the past, learn from the mistakes in the past, but not let that be a determining factor in the nanosecond of present that just became past when you're putting your strategy and steps forward for the future that you want to achieve. To bring it closer to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you look at the polls that were conducted between 1995 and 2013, you'll find that the majority on both sides would say peace is possible. But if you tweak the question and ask them, is peace possible in their lifetime? They'll tell you no way. That 75% and 70% would go down to 30% and 40%. And if you tweak the question more and more, and if you ask the Israeli community, is peace possible with the Palestinians? You'll hear, no way. We trusted them since 1995. They continued committing suicide attacks, throwing rocks, shooting at Israelis. We redeployed out of Gaza. They launched rockets at us. And you know what? That is the painful experience that the Jewish community has accumulated over a failure of 20 years of attempt of peace. Similar to that is the Palestinian answer. So you ask the Palestinians, is peace possible with Israelis? They'll tell you, no way. We trusted them since 1995. We gave up 78% of historical Palestine. They continued to take more lands, build more settlements, uproot trees, imprison Palestinians, and build the wall. So what's happening here is that people believe in a vision of the future, but the past is so alive that tells us it's impossible in a sense. And that was a moment of a new high in my life. I said, that's it. We'll bring this tool to the peace activist community. We'll teach them to distinguish and differentiate in their life and become conscious of how this past is telling them that that future is impossible. And we did so, and we trained leaders on both sides. And that basically is a methodology that brings people out of the box as to be able to think out of the box in a sense. And we did negotiations behind closed doors, where it was a negotiation built on a simulation where both sides had actually to play each other's role. So that meant that the Palestinians had to really dig deep and understand the Israeli narrative of negotiation and interest, and vice versa, the Israelis had to study the Palestinian narrative of negotiation and interest. And behind closed doors again, they negotiated, and white smoke came out. We had not only people who were able to agree to solutions, but also people who were able to look out of the box and remind us that actually there are 23 solutions, at least 10, that are on the table. Not only the two-state solution and the one-state solution, because those are the two highly known solutions so far, but there were 23 solutions on the table. And that was, again, a moment of joy for me, because yes, we are seeing what we have been taught as, or what we have been observing as something that is impossible. I was coming to see it happening on the ground. And at the end of the night, we would sit down for coffee or for beer, and my Israeli partners and peers would tell me, you know, Antoine, in real life, we cannot accept this. Kodem kol bitachon, first and foremost security. And on the Palestinian side, Palestinian peers of mine and partners of mine would say, you know, we cannot accept this because first and foremost national aspirations. And it was the year 2013 where I decided enough is enough. Those are two angry kids who just want to continue fighting about the ball and never want to learn how to share the ball. And I decided to leave the land. I said enough is enough. And as my decision came out that I wanted to leave the land, I met with the founder of the organization, Holy Land Trust, and I told him on my decision. His name is Sami, and since I did nonlinear training with them, I became friends with him, and we would share from time to time on what's happening on both sides. And when I told him that I want to leave the land, he started laughing at me. When I told him I had enough and that, you know, those kids can fight as much as they want, he started laughing more and more. And he said, you know, Antoine, we've learned in nonlinear that life consists of those three domains, past, present, and future. And we said that we need to honor, cherish, respect the past, learn from the mistakes in it, and not allow it to be a determining factor in the nanosecond of present of how we're moving forward. But how did we heal the past? Those were his words. How did we heal the past? And as a political activist, that meant nothing to me. I didn't understand what he was talking about. He's a person who would always talk about compassionate activism and compassion in general. And he would always challenge me, asking me, you know, in your culturally Christian identity of yours, Antoine, what does it mean, love your enemy? In the back of my head, the conversation would be, does he want me to go hug a soldier on a checkpoint? It's not going to change anything. And in the midst of this whole conversation, he said, how did we deal with those traumatic experiences in that domain of the past? And for the second time in my life, somebody used the term trauma when it comes to the conflict. The first time was when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I'm blessed with and cursed with a strong childhood memory, when my mom stood up to soldiers in the middle of the night and told them that they will not enter the house because she has kids and she does not want them to be traumatized. And for the rest of my life, I've observed trauma on both sides in the conflict, but nobody, whether in peace and in the peace activism or on the political level, would talk about the trauma of the communities on both sides. Now, I didn't understand any of what he was saying again and what trauma would play a role, but I felt that there is something there that I need to learn more on. And again, my background is not a psychologist. I studied law, but I decided to say yes to Sami. And I decided that I needed to start learning what are those traumatic experiences of each community and how do they affect us in who we are right now and even in our pursuit for peace. And I started learning specifically about the Israeli community, by traveling to the most recent history of the Jewish community, which is in Auschwitz and Birkenau. and I've spent 5 days in Auschwitz and Birkenau with a group of meditators that travel around the world and bear witness where atrocities happened. Maybe you're familiar with the name Bernie Glassman. And it wasn't easy for me to be there. For the first 2 days, I could not sit and bear witness without my Palestinian identity kicking in. And the reason for that, not because, this is a new narrative. No, it wasn't a new narrative for me, the Holocaust. I learned about it in school. The reason why I could not disengage from my Palestinian identity was the reality that I understood Hebrew. And I would see on daily basis students being brought into the camp, doing the tour, and they would be brought for the briefing where the railroad area was. And that was the area we would sit to meditate. So I could hear Hebrew, and I could hear the words where the students were told, this is not only your past. This is your past, your present, and your future, if the Arabs are given the chance, if the Palestinians are given the chance. The second day, it became clear to me. This is the reason why my Israeli empathetic partners and activists, whenever we would talk about peace and we would reach something close to achieving an understanding of what we want to live in, they would come out and say, in real life, we cannot accept this. First and foremost, security. It made so much sense to me, because in the subconscious of every Israeli and the majority of the Jewish community, I am the new Nazi for the Jewish community in a sense. That experience not only allowed me to see the other and understand the fear in the other community, but also allowed me towards the end to understand my own community. Why we as Palestinians will always talk about nationhood, statehood, army, borders. Aren't we traumatized by all those experiences? And it became clear to me, because, whether we like to talk about it or not, prior to the Israeli occupation, there was another 600 years of occupation of the Ottoman Empire, where communities there were suppressed in their identity, whether on a cultural level or on a religious level. Having this knowledge and coming to acquire this knowledge opens a new space to understand what is peacemaking and what is actually activism in a sense. Because yes, we were active in the past trying to achieve peace, but it wasn't coming from a space of wanting that day of tomorrow where I and the other exist in peace. It was coming from a space where we were both so much afraid of each other that we wanted just to get rid from each other. To give a small mirror to how it did play out in the peace process and the activism. Some weeks from now, it will be the Memorial Day for Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister. Do you know who assassinated Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister? What do we know about Yigal Amir? Sorry?
Following dictates of rabbis who basically said that this was a holy act.
So religious, somebody said settler here, I can't remember who said settler. Basically what we were taught as activists, that he belongs to that group that didn't want us to have our peace. And similar to that is what we learned about every Palestinian who committed suicide attack. We were so high on the morality of peace that we didn't take a step backwards and ask the question, what's behind those violent acts? Nobody is born with a DNA command to kill. People go to that extreme out of despair and hopelessness. Yigal Amir basically represents a Jewish community that was marginalized in the peace process, that their connection, their interest in peace was marginalized. Similar to that, Palestinians who were basically refugees, the majority of them, and people who were first-hand traumatized from the conflict, were not represented in the peace camp. 83% of those suicide attackers were people who were actually first-hand traumatized. Again, refugees and people who were shot or lost a family member or lost a business or something. So we were so high on the morality of peace as people in the peace camp, and that shows how much powerful that morality of peace is, that we didn't take a moment to step back and ask what's happening. We went immediately into putting people into boxes and separating ourselves from them. So when we come to put that lens and understand what that trauma and how it impacts us and how it impacts even the pursuit of peace and the vision of peace, we come to realize nowadays that actually as much as we wanted to make peace, we were actually causing oppression for communities in the land. And we can talk about it more in the questions, but I want to give now to Hanan.
Thank you for having us. How could it be that for 33 years, I've lived my life in an area where there are probably 9 Palestinians for each Israeli, and I'd never met even one Palestinian? There's something a little bit rotten about that. And I want to tell you the story of how that rotten situation developed and why, and how it changed, or at least began to change. And this story is a bit of a roller coaster ride. It begins in one way, moves to a different way, ends up in a third place with hairpin turns and unexpected developments. So I urge you to be prepared to be surprised. You look at me, you see a Jew, you see a Zionist, and you see a settler. And I want to take 3 or 4 minutes for each of those labels. What do they mean to me? So when I say I'm a Jew, the most important thing that I want to make clear is that although I practice the Jewish religion, that's not what I mean to highlight when I say I'm a Jew. Rather, I mean to highlight Jewish peoplehood. I'm a member of a people that's been on this earth for 3,000 years. We begin in the book of Genesis. We go through history to the present and the future. I am not just the person who's standing in front of you here. I'm a link in a chain, a long chain. I'm not just a link in a chain, actually. Every single link in the chain is part of my sense of identity. That's collective identity. You know, my birth certificate says I was born in 1957, but I wasn't. I was born a long, long time ago, and every single stage in Jewish history, in some sense, is part of my personal story. And that personal story, when it begins in the book of Genesis chapter 12, says that God is going to make of Abraham and Sarah a great nation. There'll be as many as the stars in the sky, as many as the grains of sand on the seashore. And all those descendants will be a great nation who will inherit the land of Canaan. Which means, for better or for worse, politically correct or not, Jewish identity of Jewish peoplehood is Jewish nationhood is connected to a piece of real estate. That's my identity as a Jew. But then I said, I'm not just a Jew. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is a big, big tent. Different ways to interpret it. In my understanding, a Zionist Jew is one who has a sense that Jewish destiny has begun to be fulfilled in our generation the past 100 years. Because in the year 70, the Romans exiled us from the land of Israel, destroyed the temple, and we were sent to the 4 corners of the universe. We've been in Northern Africa, we've been in the Middle East, we've been in Europe recently, we've been in America and Australia. And during all those years, it's not just geographic exile, it's existential exile. We have a sense that we're just holding on for dear life, that we're running in place, we're treading water, we're holding our heads above the water level, remembering our tradition, so that when the day comes that we can be back in the land, we'll know who we are. But until we're back in the land, it's not the real thing. It's just the Jewish religion. Jewish peoplehood can only be practiced in the land of Israel. And that's why 100 years ago, in my understanding, the Jewish people has begun to realize its destiny. And that explains why my English is pretty good. Because I wasn't born in Israel. Rather, I was born in New York. But I made aliyah, meaning I ascended to the land with my 2 suitcases when I was 18, because I had a sense that I wanted to be at the forefront. I wanted to be at center stage of Jewish history. I wanted to be where we were fulfilling our dreams after 2,000 years of exile, of crying, of yearning, of hoping next year in Jerusalem when we have the chance to actually be there in this generation. How can I say no? How can I sit on the sidelines? So I made aliyah, I ascended to land, and I felt that I became part of the Jewish heartbeat. We're back in history. We're being what we're supposed to be. We're recreating the sovereign nation that had been destroyed 2,000 years ago. I'm going to turn around, and I hope I see the map on the board. Okay. So now I can explain that I'm not just a Jew, and I'm not just Zionist, I'm a settler. Now, when I say I'm a settler, I understand very clearly that it sounds like I'm making a radical, even extremist political statement. I understand that. But my intention is not to make a political statement, it's to make a historical statement, a statement of continuity, and I'll explain what I mean. So we're looking at the map. You see the area that looks something like yellow, Israel in the 1948 line until 1967, and then you see what the map calls the West Bank in something like blue. So an Israeli settler is a Jewish Israeli who moves over the line, what we call the green line, from the area that's in the yellow to the area that's in the blue. I'm a settler. Now I'm going to make another statement that sounds like it's a radical, political, extremist statement. The map calls the area where I live the West Bank. Others call it Palestine. Others call it Palestinian territory, occupied territory, liberated territory, greater Israel, disputed territory. I call it all those things, but I also call it something else. I call it Judea and Samaria. Why do I call it Judea and Samaria? Because that's what the Bible calls it. Not to make a political statement, but to make a historical statement of continuity. Over 100 times, this is going back 2,700 years ago, the Bible says that the area south of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, is called Judea, because that's where the tribe of Judah inherited. And the area above Jerusalem to the north, you see Nablus there, Shechem, is Samaria, because that's where the 10 tribes made their kingdom. It was called Samaria. So I live where I live, and I call it what I call it because there's a link in a chain that goes back over 3,000 years ago. If I'm coming back to the land to fulfill Jewish destiny, I want to do it in the place where the Jewish people were born and where we lived for the 1,000 years when we lived in land, because we never lived in Tel Aviv. You see all those cities on the coast, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Tel Aviv, Hadera, up there, Haifa, Akko. Those cities, yes, they're part of the land of Israel, they're part of the state of Israel, I admit that. But when the Jewish people lived in our land, we never made it to the coast. That was the land of the Philistines, later the land of the Hellenistic cities. Where were the Jewish people born? Where did we live our history? From where were we exiled? From the central mountain range, from Nablus in the north, going through Jerusalem to Bethlehem, Hebron, down to Beersheba. That's where the Jewish people were born. That's where we have our history. That's where 90% of the Bible was written and describes life there, not on the coast. Where I live in Judea. I live between Bethlehem and Hebron. Where I live, you can walk outside, scrape the land, the earth with your heel, and come up in so many places with potsherds that our ancestors left 2,000 years ago. I live very close, a 10-minute walk from an area we excavated 2 ancient mikvot, 2 ancient ritual baths, carved in the limestone 2,000 years ago, 7 steps going down, 7 steps coming up. They filled with water in the winter, then and today. And that's where 2,000 years ago, the Jewish pilgrims streaming to the temple in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, that's where they immersed themselves in the waters of the mikveh to be pure on the way to worshiping God in the temple. Where I live in Judea, we study the Bible, yes, in the classroom, but even more than we study the Bible in the fields. We take it in our backpack and go outside, read it, and this is where it happened. This is where Abraham walked. This is where the battle of David and Goliath took place. This is where the temple was. It's all real. It's all alive. And our sense is that we are writing the next page in Jewish history in the Bible through living where our ancestors lived and died. And I believe today that the power and the righteousness of those stories I just told you has blinded me my whole life to another story. I didn't see the Palestinians. My eyes were completely covered. My story was so powerful to me and so enveloping that the Palestinians were transparent. They weren't supposed to be there, so they weren't there. I was not equipped with the mental building blocks that would allow me to see 90% of the people who walk in the streets where I live. For me, the Palestinians, for 33 years of my life, were like background noise on the radio, a disturbance that you just want to ignore, get rid of. The Palestinians were like the gray, drab scenery passing in the background of a movie, but not part of the plot. I was very blind, and there's something deeply, deeply wrong with that. And I want to tell you a little story of blindness, typical story. A young woman, 27 years old. She grew up in Judea, a neighbor of mine. All 27 years of her life lived in our settlement of Alon Shvut between Bethlehem and Hebron. And about 2 years ago, she got word of the fact that Antoine and I and so many other Palestinians, Israelis are building bridges of understanding between the two peoples in our movement, and she asked to join. She came over my house, I described to her the work, and she said, "That's fantastic, I'm going to volunteer." I gave her a piece of paper. On the piece of paper was a name, Muhaned, and a phone number. And I said to her, call up Muhaned from Beit Umar and do a youth project together. She said, I'm going to call him up immediately, just one question. What is Beit Umar, she said. And now I'm going to tell you what is Beit Umar. Beit Umar is a thriving Palestinian city of 20,000 human beings that is a mere 6-minute drive from where this young woman spent the whole 27 years of her life. And she didn't ask me, where is Beit Umar? She asked me, what is Beit Umar? That's rotten. But that's typical of where I come from. And I'm not blaming that young woman. I'm blaming me. I'm blaming all of us adults who have created a culture and a context in which we can raise kids from childhood to adulthood, and they don't know anything beyond the borders of the fence. We're all blind. And I'm talking for my own people, but it's very similar on the Palestinian side as well. We just don't see the other. He or she is not there. And he's not there because he's not supposed to be there. And we all believe that the other side's going to disappear tomorrow, but they're not. They're here to stay. I want to tell you another story of blindness, and this is about me. About 3 years ago, a little bit more, I'm driving in my car. I have 2 Protestant pastors from the States. They want to see the flourishing of Jewish settlements. They want to see how we are literally fulfilling the prophecies of Isaiah, of Jeremiah, of Zechariah, how the land is coming to life. And I showed them with great pride as we went from settlement to settlement. I picked up a hitchhiker because there was room in the car. I picked up another one. When the second hitchhiker got out of the car, one of the pastors turned to me and said, Hanan, you're such a nice guy. You pick up hitchhikers. We don't do that in Texas. And I said to him, Bob, around here, it's not just me. We have a common destiny. We trust each other. I try to pick up every person who puts out his finger. And by the time I finished the sentence, I realized I was lying. I was lying to Bob. But even worse, I was lying to me. I do not try to pick up every person who puts out his finger. I pick up only Jews. And what bothered me at that moment, when I caught myself, was not the fact that I pick up only Jews. What bothered me was the fact that I didn't realize that I pick up only Jews, that I was able to say that I pick up every person. And how was I able to lie to myself? Because I didn't see there was anyone else out there. I didn't see that in the snow and the rain there's Palestinian men walking with shopping bags. I didn't see that. I didn't see that there's Palestinian women walking in the sun in the summer with baskets on their head. I didn't see. Because they weren't supposed to be there. And now I want to tell you how I started to see. It was January 2014, the last Thursday of the month. I'm in my house. I got an invitation to go meet Palestinians. And I'm going to leave you in suspense for a few seconds. Before I tell you how it began to get better, I'm going to tell you how bad the situation is. We Israelis and Palestinians in Judea and Samaria / the West Bank, we live right next to each other. But we live in separate towns and villages. We have different transportation systems. We speak different languages. We have different religions. We have different school systems. We have different municipalities. We live under different legal systems. We have different media, radio, television, newspaper. The news I know is not the news that they know. We live in 2 completely different worlds. We even live in different time zones. You'll say, how could that be? Well, the Palestinian Authority and Israel switch to and from daylight savings time in different days, weeks, and sometimes even months. I once, as I'm beginning to meet Palestinians, I set an appointment with someone, and I got there at 1 p.m. as we had decided, but he's not there, and I waited 5 minutes. I called him up. He said, it's only 12 o'clock. And then we realized it's different universes, which means that we're going to, of course, live with stereotypes of the other and ignorance and prejudices and racism. That's a given. But it's even worse than that, because where we come from, there's violence. You know that Palestinians know very little of the violence they do to us. It's not in their newspapers. In the newspapers appears only the violence that we do to them. And the same thing in Israeli newspapers. Our newspapers never tell me the violence that my people do to them, only the violence that they do to us. So both sides know the other side is aggressive and terroristic and violent and terrible. So add into the mix of the stereotypes and the racism, the knowledge that the other side is violent, you get a volatile cocktail that leads to fear and rage. We're afraid of the other, and we're raging against, why are they doing this to us? And we have no idea. So I'm in my living room, and I'm about to go meet Palestinians. I put my hand on the front doorknob. My wife says, where are you going? I say, I'm going to meet Palestinians. And she says, you're crazy, they'll kill you. And she begged me not to go. I saw the fear in her eyes. But I went anyway. I'm a little bit crazy. And my heart was pounding. I was afraid. I didn't have to take the car. I walked through the orchards and vineyards around my home for 20 minutes. And I got where the instructions said to go. And I walked in the metal gate. And I saw something that can't be. Something that doesn't happen where we come from. I saw 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. Everyone gasped together, talking to each other. So I walk in. And I see that there's this Palestinian woman dressed in brown from head to toe. I can see only her face, clearly an observant Muslim. And I walk up and say hello. She says hello back to me. We talk for less than a minute. And then I said to her, I can't believe that I'm talking to you. And she said to me, I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to settlers. But we kept talking. And then she introduced me to her son. So Yazin's 17 years old. He's standing right next to her, and we shake hands. And when he puts out his hand to shake my hand, I see he's wearing a windbreaker that says on it in English, on the lapel, Seeds of Peace. Anyone here know what Seeds of Peace is? Thank God that you know, but it's not the majority of the audience. I had no idea what Seeds of Peace is in those days, 3.5 years ago, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty, that Palestinians and peace don't go together. So I was certain that Yazin found this jacket on the floor. He has no idea what is written on the lapel. So I said, Yazin, what's the Seeds of Peace thing? And he goes on to describe to me what some of you know, that Seeds of Peace is a camp in Maine, USA. It takes young Palestinian kids and young Israeli kids for a summer away from the conflict zone of recreation and reconciliation. Yazin said he just got back from there, had a great time. He now has Israeli friends on Facebook, and he wants to spend some of his life, he said, building bridges between our two peoples. And I cannot decide if I can believe him or not. Because what he's telling me flies in the face of everything I know to be true. So I'm confused. And then Yazin introduces me to his father. Jamal is standing right there. We shake hands. Jamal tells me they're from Beit Umar. That's the same Beit Umar I mentioned earlier. So I told Jamal, I know about Beit Umar. I've passed by a few times. So he wants to show me on Google Maps where he lives in Beit Umar. He takes out his cell phone to show me where he lives. And I remember staring at his phone because I couldn't believe that a Palestinian owns a smartphone. And then he had to teach me how to use Google Maps, which was really humbling. But I've learned since then, don't worry. We talked quite a bit, Jamal and I. He told me lots of stories. I'll just tell you 2 stories that he told me. One was about his own personal development. He told me that most of his life he never met an Israeli and hated them. Completely hated them. And once upon a time, his friend said, I've met some Israelis. We have these gatherings in Jericho. Perhaps you want to come with me? And Jamal said, I'm not going with you. I don't never want to meet an Israeli. They're child killers. But his friend kept trying to convince him. And finally, Jamal gave in. He said, okay, I'll go with you. And Jamal went to Jericho with his friend. And there was Israelis in the room and Palestinians. Jamal told me, I made sure to sit in the corner so I wouldn't have to talk to any of the Israelis. But it happened. An Israeli comes up to me, and we have to shake hands, and we talk a little bit. And Jamal said, I made every effort to make the conversation as quick as possible, as short as possible. And when the guy left, I made a beeline for the bathroom to wash off my hand from the filth of touching an Israeli. And Jamal described to me how his life has changed since that encounter, and now he's a peacemaker. At the end of our conversation, Jamal said, Hanan, I hope you understand that when the kids in Beit Umar see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, Jamal, why do they start to cry? And he was confused by the fact that I didn't understand. But finally he said to me, Hanan, you don't get it? All the people with the big kippot like the one that you have, and the long beards and the tzitzit hanging from their pants, well, all those people, they carry submachine guns and they kill the kids in Beit Umar. So what am I going to say to him? There was silence. And then a light bulb goes off in my mind, and I realize this is a moment of blessing. Because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. And if I can only find room to hold that, that's a blessing. And I said to myself, I can do it. I can hold it. But so what am I going to say to Jamal? And I thought for a minute, then another light bulb goes off my mind, and I said, yeah, I can put myself in the shoes of those little kids, because we and they do look so different, and we do carry guns when we walk in the fields. So I said, Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he looks at me as if I'm crazy, and he says, no, you're not afraid of us. We're afraid of you. And that was a real moment of revelation. I met a lot of people that day at that event. As the sun was going down, we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians, and one of the Israelis, the convener of the event on the Israeli side, tried to explain who we Israelis are, what is the Jewish connection to the land, why Judea and Samaria is the place we want to be, where we find there our connection to history. And after the Israeli spoke, a Palestinian spoke. It was the Palestinian convener of the event and the owner of the land we were sitting on. His name is Ali Abu Awad. And Ali said, I'm from Beit Umar, and I'm from a refugee family. I want to try and explain to you settlers what it's like growing up in Beit Umar under Israeli occupation. Did he say Israeli occupation? What's that? I said to myself. But it felt like a dagger through my heart, even though I didn't really know what it is. I never in my life had heard a human being use those two words, Israeli occupation. I read in the newspaper, I heard on the radio, but a human being telling me that he lives under my occupation, what's he talking about? Because when I drive in my car, I don't see any occupation. I see the flourishing of Jewish settlement, I see the return of the children to the land after 2,000 years. I see the righteousness of the arc of history. I see that only 3 years after the Holocaust, we created finally a refuge for our poor, bedraggled, half-dead bodies. What could be more righteous than that? And suddenly I hear that my triumph is another nation's tragedy, and that my righteousness is another nation's suffering. What am I going to do with that? I had no idea. I was completely confused, but I couldn't raise my hand and say, Ali, you're lying, because he was telling the story of his life. It couldn't be a lie, but it didn't seem to be true, because it was against everything that I knew to be true. And I went home, and I was confounded and challenged, and I paced back and forth in my study day after day after day, and I began to get nauseous. And I felt two identities churning inside me, two truths. They can't both be true. I'm here because this is Israel. This is my homeland. I've come back to where my forefathers lived, where we've been hoping and praying for 2,000 years to return to the land. It's ours. But Ali says it's his. I say it's Israel. He says it's Palestine. He's a human being. I had no idea there were human beings who are called Palestinians, has an identity, has a family, has national aspirations. How could that be? I went and I met Ali again, and we talked quite a bit. As the months are going by, one day I did something that I felt very, very guilty doing. I did what anyone in the 21st century would do when he has something that he wants to figure out. I went to Google, and I closed the door to my study, made sure no one was looking at me. Actually, before I typed in the words I'm about to tell you that I typed into the search bar, I looked behind me. When the coast was clear, I typed in Israeli occupation of Palestine. And I got to all these leftist websites that a good Orthodox rabbi settler like me should never be caught dead reading. And I read them all. I never heard of the names before. Much of what I read was directed against me, the source of all evil in the Middle East, the settlers. Many websites said if the settlers would just go home, it would all be better, there'd be peace. Some say go home to Tel Aviv, some said go home to New York. I knew that wasn't the whole truth. Much of what I read seemed to be borderline anti-Semitic. I rejected it. But some of what I read penetrated my heart as true, even though it was directed against me. And clearly, what allowed my soul to accept an uncomfortable truth was the fact that I had met human beings, Palestinians, a few weeks and months before. I'd been softened. And I began to see there's another reality, another truth that I have to deal with. And then I remember the words of Ali Abu Awad, who had been actually becoming my rabbi. You're supposed to laugh when I say that. And Ali said that for most of his life, he had the Palestinian nation on his shoulder, and it was really heavy with responsibility. He fought for the Palestinian nation. He threw rocks. He did violent acts. He was arrested by Israel. He spent many, many years in jail. But he was proud to support the Palestinian nation. And then one day, a bereaved Israeli mother came over to his house after calling and asking permission and brought a whole delegation. And these bereaved Israeli mothers came to comfort his own mother, who a year before had lost her son, murdered by Israeli soldiers. And Ali saw that Israelis have tears, and that the tears of the Israeli mothers are the same color as the tears of his own mother. And he said he was blown away. I didn't know that Israelis have feelings. And he began a long journey of personal transformation until he came to a place of becoming an activist for peace. And he has not only the Palestinian nation on this shoulder, but the Israeli nation on the other shoulder. And that became my model. We have to develop an identity, which I am who I am. I'm a Jew, and I'm a Zionist, and I'm deeply connected to the land that I've settled. But I also have to recognize and make room in my heart for the fact that it's all Israel, but it's also all Palestine. And it's all mine, but it's also all theirs. And I have a story and a deep connection to the land, and the Palestinians also have a story and a deep, deep connection to the land. We have to develop that identity that respects and cherishes the identity of the other. That's become my mission in life. And as I'm going through this personal transformation the past 3.5 years, we're creating Roots, the organization we're here to tell you about tonight. As part of that transformation, Roots is the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. And as I'm going through this transformation, hundreds of other Israelis and Palestinians who we're bringing together are undergoing that same transformation. It's very powerful, and it's the only way. Without that, there'll never be peace. The politicians can sign a piece of paper, but it'll blow up in our faces like Oslo did, because the two nations don't recognize each other. They don't see that there's someone to talk to, there's a partner, there's a human being, there's a national narrative, there's aspirations. No, all I see on the other side, all most of us see on the other side, is an enemy. I want to conclude by summarizing the things that I said in theological terms, because I'm a rabbi, and I talk in terms of God and of Jewish mysticism. The Jewish mystics of old told us that God is the Ein Sof, the infinite. But you have to ask yourself, infinite what? Infinite space, infinite time, infinite green chairs? What's the infinity of God? If you read between the lines in Jewish mysticism, you'll see that God is the infinite kaleidoscope of all the truths of the world, balancing and rebalancing, juggling and rejuggling. And if God is the infinite kaleidoscope of all the truths of the world, then I have an obligation. In Judaism, we teach you're supposed to imitate God, walk in God's footsteps, be like God. What that means, among other things, is to be like God and let more and more partial truths, other truths into your soul. It's hard. It's really hard. As a Jew, I have to search out the Muslim truth, the Christian truth, the Buddhist truth, and especially the Palestinian truth. That's my challenge. The Jewish mystics talk about the obligation of going about the world and collecting the sparks of divine truth everywhere. And I want to collect the sparks one by one and bring them into my soul, not in order to contradict who I am, but to broaden who I am. And a beautiful metaphor for that is based on a verse in the book of Proverbs that says, death and life are in the hands of the tongue. The metaphor says, the explanation of the metaphor says that what does it mean that death is in the hands of the tongue? That I can go around the world and spit at the sparks of uncomfortable truth. And that's death. I can kill those truths. If I'm a Republican, I probably spend a lot of time going around the world and spitting at the Democratic sparks and killing them. And if I'm a Democrat, I probably spend a lot of time spitting at the Republican sparks and putting them out. That's not the way. That's death. There's a better way. Life is in the hands of the tongue. That means I can go around the world and I can blow gently at the sparks of uncomfortable truth that bother me, that enrage me. But I can blow gently. I can find something there that is meaningful to me, something I can put into my soul. I can massage the truth and expand and grow. That's what it means to bring life to the world and to make myself a better Jew and a better human being. And the sparks that I want to blow on, and it's so hard for me to blow on, are the Palestinian sparks. But that's my obligation. And the last thing I want to say in this little theological parenthetical statement is that about 80 years ago, the first chief rabbi of the reconstituted settlement in the Holy Land, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cohen Cook, said the following: if the world is full of sparks of partial truth, then is there falsehood anywhere? If it's all true, is anything false? And his answer was that the world is actually full of falsehood, unfortunately. Listen to this. Falsehood, he said, is partial truth masquerading as complete truth. If you think you have it all, then you don't. Then you're in darkness. And I think that describes me, that for 33 years I've lived in darkness because I thought that I had all the light, all the sparks, that only my sparks were true. What I have to do is to admit that I have only part of the truth, and my obligation is to collect and blow on more and more sparks of partial truth, of Palestinian truth, and to learn and to grow. That's what we do in Roots. We listen to each other till it hurts. We listen and we listen more, and we try to make room for the other in our minds and our souls. The last thing I'm going to say is that through the last 3 years of dialogue and growth in Roots and bringing more and more Palestinian Israelis into the dialogue, I've learned from my partners, from my Palestinian partners, that dialogue is really important, but it's not enough. You have to do something about it. You have to do something about it. And what happens is, if you're looking to do something about it, is you realize that if you've lived your life on the basis of a partial truth that you thought to be the full truth, you've probably been trampling on the other's truth. And indeed, I believe that Jewish settlement in the whole land of Israel is very, very central, important, and just. But I've been doing it unjustly. I've been doing it, my people has been doing it by trampling on the dignity of the Palestinian people. That's wrong, that's bad, that's rotten. And what we're doing in Roots is we're not only dialoguing and understanding and expanding our hearts, we're creating a new model of coexistence that provides rights and dignity, not only for me, but also for the Palestinians in that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
אנחנו נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי. כשבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות, אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין, השמאל לא יעשה שלום.
The first time I had heard someone talk about being in Israeli jail, someone talking about suffering under occupation.
וזה שאני מכבד אותך, זה הכבוד שאני מכבד את עצמי כשאני מסתכל על עצמי בראי.
We believe that religion has to be part of the solution.
אללהו אכבר. אדוני הוא האלוהים.
יהודים ניצודים בארץ ישראל כמו חיות, ממש. פשוט צדים אותם. רואים רכב, איפה הם? איפה השותף? איפה האח?
אתה יושב על הכלכלה שלי, אתה יושב על הבית שלי, אתה יושב על הלב שלי, אבל לא כשותף.
האם אתה מוכן להודות שהישיבה שלך פה היא ישיבה של פשע? וממילא תגיד לי מבחינה פוליטית.
The Jewish people, that we own this land? We don't own this land. We belong to this land. And the Palestinian people also belong to this land.
אנחנו האחרונים בעולם שצריך לשבת אחד עם השני. באתי לבקש לדרוש איתם מחברים. מפני שאת ואני סבלנו שלא חיפשנו את זה לפני.
I'd like to welcome you to Merkaz Karama. You saw it in the film. Merkaz is a Hebrew word that means center. And Karam is an Arabic word that means dignity. It's a dignity center. And the very fact that the dignity center, its name is composed of two words, one Arabic and one Hebrew, tells you something what we do in the dignity center. We try to create dignity and human rights by respecting and loving two cultures, two peoples, two nationalities that are warring over one piece of land. Merkaz Karama is owned by the Abu Awad family, that piece of land. It has been loaned to Roots, to our organization, to make this a reality, this new identity of each respecting the other. We have hundreds of activities almost every day. There's local Palestinians and local Israelis coming to see the other. I want to tell you what I mean by local. The Palestinians, by and large, who are part of Roots, are from refugee families who've suffered greatly in this conflict. They're from families with a history of violent activism who've suffered greatly in this conflict. They're religious, traditional Muslims who have a deep connection to their narrative and to their history and to the land. These are the people on the Palestinian side who've been considered to be enemies of peace, who've been marginalized by the Oslo peace process, the people who are always on the side sniping and making sure there's not going to be peace. Those are the people involved in the dialogue. It's a miracle. And on the Israeli side, the same thing. Who are the local Israelis in Merkaz Karama who are meeting in the framework of Roots? It's my people. It's the settlers, the religious Jews who are most connected to land and history and have the most to lose from peace, have always been marginalized by the peace process. They're the people that are coming to see and to hear and to love and respect the other. And we believe that if we can bring the two extremes together, as we are, and continuing to do, then the rest of the country will follow us. It's really amazing to see what happens. But there is so much in common between Judaism and Islam. And there's so much in common between the suffering of our two peoples. And our identities and our narratives are so intertwined, even though we think there's so much in conflict. How do we do it? Well, first of all, we have children's programs. We have a summer camp for little kids, a day camp, and for older kids, a sleepaway camp. We have photography workshops for little kids. Everything I'm saying is the two sides together, Israelis and Palestinians. And then for adults, we have women's photography workshops. We have so many different interfaith study groups, Jews and Muslims, Jews and Christians, women, traditional women, Muslims and Jews. We have, I mentioned the photography workshop for women. We have open houses twice a month on the piece of land you see. We built classrooms, we built a kitchen. People come for Café Judour, open house of Roots twice a month. Israelis and Palestinians, you never know who's going to come there. 15 Israelis, 15 Palestinians, sometimes 20 and 20 to talk, to argue, to argue fiercely, to laugh together, to play music together, to drink coffee, and relationships begin to be formed. We have a music therapy group in which the two sides play their music and explain the lyrics of their songs to the other side. It's sometimes really full of tension, but it's also really, really healing. It's very, very powerful. We have a program in which kids about to go into the Israeli army come to us for a 3-hour seminar and learn what is a Palestinian, who is a Palestinian, what's their identity, see a human being there. We have a quick response team, and when there's violence, we come and respond to the violence, whether it's an olive grove that's been destroyed by Jewish extremists, whether it's someone who's been stabbed by a Palestinian deranged youth or a terrorist, whatever it might be, we're there the next day to respond. And we see that micro transformations are happening in the people that come to our programs. And on the basis of those micro transformations, there's going to be a macro transformation. I think at this point we can open up to questions and answers. Any question and any comment, as far as I'm concerned, is legitimate. Is there a moderator, or do I moderate? Me and Antoine? I guess so.
English. At least for the part who do not understand the language of the other, the majority don't. Palestinians do know Hebrew more than Israelis do know Arabic. It happens due to the fact that many Palestinians work on the other side and had to learn the language or the reality of many of the Palestinians who specifically are engaged en route were in Israeli prisons, where most of the Palestinian community learned Hebrew.
Most rabbis in Israel don't have congregations. Very few rabbis have congregations, so it's different than America. But the question is still an important question. The work we're doing in Roots is just a drop in the bucket. We're going against the grain. We're telling a story and doing activities that most people find to be uncomfortable and ill-advised and even traitorous. So the people who've joined us are one here and one here, 100, 1,000, not more than that. It's a very, very slow process, but people come and listen. Most of the people in the settlements won't come to us, so we come to them. We have home meetings. We have, let's say, a supporter in a certain settlement. He or she is willing to open up his living room for an evening, invites 20, 30, once we had 50 people, and we bring our speaking team, one Palestinian, one Israeli. And of course, for 99% of the people coming to listen, it's the first time they've ever had a real conversation with a Palestinian. People are challenged. They're confounded. Sometimes they scream. Sometimes they get up and walk out. We keep talking. By the end of the evening, the majority of people realize that there's something they've just heard that they've never heard before, and it's worth their while to hear some more. So they sign up for an email list, and some of them come to the programs. They take the step out of the comfort zone to come to the piece of land, Merkaz Karama, and in many cases you see the transformations happening, not without a fight. A fight, of course, I don't mean a violent fight. So you're absolutely right that what we're saying is this is not just a territorial conflict, this is a conflict of identity, and therefore negotiating over resources and territory is not the beginning of the solution. That comes at the end of the solution. The beginning of the solution is the human groundwork of recognizing the other's identity, exactly so. So we've had a number of programs on Jerusalem at Merkaz Karama, at the Dignity Center, and it's about first and foremost explaining what my identity is, and the Palestinians explaining what their identity is. And as far as Jerusalem goes, that means that I, as a Jew, have to hear, recognize, and see the legitimacy in the other's deep, abiding, historical, religious connection to Jerusalem. And he has to hear and accept and legitimize my deep, abiding, historical, religious connection to Jerusalem. And that's gut-wrenching. It's gut-wrenching to admit that the other has a legitimate connection to the city that I believe to be mine and holy, and it goes in both directions. And then we say there's no other way but to accept his or her connection to that city. The same thing with the land. If the question is then, how do you go forward? That's a political issue that we have some thoughts about, but it's not the work we do. We do the spiritual, the emotional, the grassroots, the individual, the personal work of making space in the heart for the other's truth. And then the rest of it doesn't become easy, but it becomes possible.
Just want to say that in a sense, yeah, Jerusalem is a core issue, but behind closed doors, us as Palestinians, it's the whole land is an issue. It's not only Jerusalem. So whether it's Haifa, Akka, Yafa, or whether it is the West Bank or any other part. And if you hear any Palestinian, in a sense, saying that the issue is only with borders, where to draw them, or that it's only with Jerusalem, I would highly question that. Because I'm a Palestinian, and I've been around peers of mine, where behind closed doors, it's not only Jerusalem. I'm not a refugee myself, but I feel connected to Haifa. And that is one thing that we need to keep in mind, that it's not only one territory that the conflict is about. It's actually the whole and the connection of our community also, in general, on both sides, to the entire land.
So I think that you're right. I'll first mention that the spiritual inspiration for our work comes from Rabbi Menachem Fruman, iconoclast settler rabbi who died 4 years ago. And it was actually his death, so I believe, that was the impetus for the creation of a movement that would continue his legacy. And one of the founders of the movement is his widow, Hadassah Fruman. She's our powerhouse and our liaison to the army and to the political echelons, because she has all the connections that her husband had. Now, we have a group of women-to-women text study. I hinted at it briefly. Jewish women and Muslim women, they get together twice a month for study of Quran and Torah together. That's very important to us. We would like very much to expand our programs for women, because I basically agree with you that sometimes women could do a better job in peacemaking than men. The difficulties are many, but I'll tell you some of them. Many Palestinian men, I don't know if it's the majority, but many know either English or Hebrew. But Palestinian women, no. Palestinian women, certainly the ones in the villages around where we work, don't know Hebrew and don't know English, which makes it very hard. There has to be a translator. And when the translator is a man, it ruins the dynamic. We've seen that happen. We have to find female translators, which are rare. There are other issues, like the Palestinian women in many cases. Okay, there's some stories are very traditional. Staying at home with the kids to get them out is an issue. And the women in our group are dealing with that issue. Let me just mention, I assume that when you said women waging peace, you were hinting to the movement of women waging peace, which is a major movement in Israel-Palestine, and we're proud to be partners of theirs. I'll leave the rest to Antoine.
Just in general, yeah, this is a problem. The studies have shown that 3% has been involved only in this decision-making when it was about war or peace. And if we look at it from a greater space, in a sense, we're marginalizing half of the community that lives on both sides. So we have 6 million people total who are active right now, but another 6 million that's been marginalized.
So I'll answer on two levels. One is that if the Palestinians are 90% of the population in the West Bank, I would expect that 90% of the resources, land, water, would go to the Palestinians. And clearly that's not the case at this point. That's why I said that at the same time I believe deeply in Jewish connection to land and Jewish settlement, the way it's being done presently is unjust. The second level of answer to your question, I want to put on the table a political design for an equitable solution, or something like closely resembles a equitable solution. Roots is not a political movement. We don't have a political design. We do the grassroots work, as I said, but many of us in Roots do support a certain political design. It's called Two States, One Homeland. Two States, One Homeland. It is a political movement registered in Israel and Palestine, joint political Israeli-Palestinian movement, and I want to say in 1 minute what it talks about. They say as follows, in my words. They say, look, when the Palestinians wave the Hamas flag and say the whole land from the Jordan to the Mediterranean is Palestine, they're right. And when the religious settlers wave the Israeli flag and say that the whole land from the Jordan to the Mediterranean is Israel, they're right. And therefore, I mean, they're right as far as identity goes. And therefore, if you were to go to a classic two-state solution and divide the land up on the green line, what's usually suggested, it's unfair. It's unfair to the Palestinians because you are separating them from Haifa, from Akko, from the cities of the coast that are part of their identity. And it's unfair to the Jews because you're separating them from the cities in the biblical heartland of Shem, of Hebron, of Bethlehem. So you can't go for a two-state solution. But on the other hand, a one-state solution, a democratic secular state of Palestinians and Jews and Israelis and Muslims and Christians won't fly with 95% of the Jews because we want a Jewish state. And for something like 70 and 80% of the Palestinians, it won't fly because they want a Palestinian state. So I just said, you can't have a two-state solution, and you can't have a one-state solution. So it looks like we're going to kill each other for the next 100 years. The answer might be a 1.5-state solution. 2 states, 1 homeland, it goes like this. Yes, you make 2 states. The border, more or less the green line, the border you saw on the map, but it's unmarked. There's no border crossings, there's no checkpoints. You can go from one side to the other, completely free movement, and you can live your whole life as a Palestinian with Palestinian citizenship in Israel. And you can be an Israeli citizen with Israeli passport and live your whole life in Palestine as an Israeli citizen, not a Palestinian citizen. And then complete freedom of movement. And then you create a confederation between these 2 states to be called the Abrahamic Confederation with a joint army and a joint parliament. And what's so beautiful in this solution is you have your cake and you eat it too. You have your own state, but you also have the whole land. You have a sense that you have one place where your identity is centered with your flag and with your currency, but the whole land, you have a connection to the whole land at the same time that you have a separate state. And of course, in the Palestinian state, the resources would be for the Palestinians.
So I don't know if it answered or did not answer your question to my side, but in a sense, if we were meeting 4 years ago, I would be lobbying you for the 2-state solution. That was my background. This is what I was raised in. The 2-state, the framework of Oslo. Right now, I don't believe it works. I believe there's a huge pain that could be caused to both communities and specifically to the Palestinian community when we're talking about the 2-state solution. And it's not only the fear of pain that makes me reject it. Actually, what makes me reject it is coming to a point of realizing that, yeah, we as Palestinians, as an Arab community, we do have an attitude of trying to keep white face, what we call it in Arabic, white face, trying to look good, whether in front of international community or in front of our leadership. So whenever people would talk about the 2-state solution, it would be, yeah, we want the 2-state solution. But behind closed doors, we want the whole land. So for me, my belief that right now for me, I don't think there is a solution that Palestinians gather around, but we need to have those conversations into what are the needs that we want to pursue as a community and formulate them and put them out there and clear. And if that is something we believe in, then one way or another we can reach to a solution to achieve it. So whether you want to put it in a framework of a 2-state solution, a 1-state solution, I say personally 13 million state solution. There are 13 million people living in that land. Now on a personal level, I believe in the one vote, one person, one vote. How to fix it, how to develop policies to respond to the fears that make people afraid from the one state or from the two state, yeah, that is something that we have the responsibility for in the 21st century. There are obviously fears that make Palestinians say we want our own independent state, and there are always obviously fear why the Israeli Jewish community says, you know, one state solution cannot work. So my position is, let's look into those fears and try to create policies that respond to them before we start saying what is the solution. I hope that answers your question.
The answer to that, in my opinion, is yes and no. In the mainstream Israeli media, you see very little empathy for the Palestinians, very little presentation of the Palestinian position. There is one Israeli newspaper that some of you might have heard of called Haaretz, that is considered to be a left-wing, progressive, elite newspaper, which indeed presents the Palestinian position, but less and less Israelis are reading it. I don't know if it's 5% of Israelis that read it or 10%, but it's there in the single or low double digits. On the Palestinian side, you can answer that same thing. One of the things we're doing in Roots is exactly this. We're trying to embed in the mainstream local media stories about the Palestinians, about Islam, about local Muslim culture, that will be written in a fashion that won't alienate the readership, but will give them a window into the people that they're living in their midst. And it's a matter of threading a needle, because if you are too explicit in presenting Palestinian suffering, not only will no one read it, but the articles will not be accepted in the future. But of course, you don't want to whitewash. So how we're going to succeed in this project is a matter of, as an issue, but we're going forward with it. We have an expression in Hebrew, halavai, word only true. Word only true that I that I have power or authority. I don't. As I said earlier, the work of Roots, with all its importance and its influence, is still a drop in the bucket. And of course, the more I become an advocate for Palestinian identity and Palestinian suffering, I lose some of my credibility in my community. It's a dance that has to be danced. Let me say that Shaul may be doing a better job at it than I am, because I tend to be an extremist. I'm an extremist in my pluralism, I'm an extremist in my embrace of the Palestinian nation, and that doesn't win me points in my community. But how do we do it? Let me tell you, I think that I'm not able to convince a single person to change their mind. There's nothing I can say to convince someone who's deathly afraid of the Palestinians and sure they don't exist, to convince them that Palestinians exist and you don't have to be afraid of them. But what I sometimes can do is convince them to meet a Palestinian. It's the human contact. The secret weapon is the human contact. And we have hundreds of stories of Palestinians and Israelis who've been convinced, not by someone on their own side trying to convince them, but by meeting the other. So you're right. We certainly need to bring together religious leaders, and we've had some success in it. It's very difficult. You guys probably have heard of the anti-normalization movement. Although I believe that dialogue and showing the human face is the Palestinian secret weapon, most Palestinians don't agree with me, and they believe that talking to me is traitorous. In the Palestinian Authority, imams get their salary from the government. They cannot go against the government policy, the policy of the Palestinian Authority. For government imams to talk to us, they could lose their job. But we have a number of imams from within Israel and people who are Muslim scholars, but not imams, involved in the religious dialogue. It's a central part of the work that we do in Roots. And I can only tell you that it's bearing fruit, in that we, through religion, build a bridge and see the commonalities and begin to understand each other and accept each other's identity.
In general, people look at what I do when it comes to the point that I'm being with settlers specifically, and they see it proportionately crazy. My past has been known to be that I'm the person who would be active when it comes to peace between both sides, but to work with that specific community, you've gone and we've crossed the lines. So my family, for example, is afraid for me. They live in fear that what would happen to me, whether from alienation from my own community or whether from what could come from the Israeli community. Friends, and so that's my family, they live in that fear only, which is not easy to deal with. Friends, I've lost friends on both sides. I've lost Israeli friends when I started speaking to settlers, and I've lost Palestinian friends. But in the same time, I made new friends, whether it's from the settler community or whether from the Palestinian community. Again, in the past activism that I was involved in, refugees also were not part of the conversation. They were not on the table. Right now, I have more activist friends that are refugees that come to the space and hear that there's this person on the other side that recognizes their story and their legitimacy. So they come to the table, and for me at least that's a compensation that I'm willing to accept, because as a Palestinian, although I was a kid, I considered that I was part of a marginalization process towards the refugees. So I take that responsibility and I try to repair it.
Some of you took these brochures. I'll just show there's a picture of my wife. You can't see the picture, I'm sure, but if you have the brochure, you can see. My wife is taking a picture of a Palestinian woman. The story goes like this. At the very beginning of my move towards meeting my neighbors, my wife was afraid. She was frightened. She was against it. And then we had Ali Abu Awad for dinner one night. And she served them coffee. And the ice began to break. Later, we had other Palestinians over. My wife began to get to know them. And then I invited my wife to participate in the women's photography workshop. The woman who leads the workshop told me that on the first day, she made pairs of Palestinian woman and an Israeli woman and told them to take pictures of each other. And my wife was unable to do that. She couldn't look the Palestinian woman in the eyes. But the second day, something changed, something developed, and you have this beautiful picture of my wife taking a picture of Jemana's beautiful blue eyes. And a change was created. Now my wife is a member of the music therapy group. She's visited Palestinian friends in the Palestinian village of Husan. She just told me on the phone today that she spent an hour on the phone with one of the Palestinians that she's met. So changes happen. I have 4 children. My youngest daughter was the director of our summer camp, the Root Summer Camp. Another daughter of mine sent her 2 grandchildren to the summer camp, and they're supporters. It took a long process. I'll tell you that at the beginning, my married daughter wasn't so much in favor. One day, about 2.5 years ago, as Roots was getting off the ground, I got a phone call from a Palestinian who said, Hanan, how you doing? It was a Friday afternoon when we're preparing for Shabbat, usually don't go out of the home. And he said he has to borrow some money. I said, okay, I'll give you some money. I'll bring it over on Sunday. He said, no, I need it now. So I said, okay, I'll bring it over now. How much do you need? He told me how much he needed. I put down the phone. I said, I'm coming right over. And I looked in my wallet. The wallet was empty. So I went to my married daughter, who lives next door, and I said, I need some money. She said, fine, I'll give you 2, but what do you need it for? So I said, what do you need it for? And she said, I'll give you the money, but I beg you, don't go. It's a trap. You're going to be ambushed and they'll kill you. That's the fear we live with. But that's the fear that this daughter of mine no longer lives with when she's come to our activities and sent her grandchildren to meet Palestinian kids. So transformations happen, and they're for real. And for me, they're the most wonderful thing. I'm a better human being, and my family's a better family today because we know the humanity on the other side.
Power imbalance and conflict is obvious. If we want to deny it, we could be, claim to be smart and deny it, but it's not going to change anything at the end of the day. Definitely there's an imbalance in power here. How do we go about it? Is dialogue the only way? Dialogue is needed, but it's not the tool that delivers us to a different tomorrow. Dialogue can always be the space where I can bring my grievances to the other, and we've seen it throughout history of nonviolence movements, how it was always found, whether from Gandhi experience to Martin Luther King experience, they used to talk to the other referring to the enemy. Eventually, what we have learned through cultures and experiences of humanity in the past, that nonviolence, specifically direct action of nonviolence, is one step forward into changing the realities. What I see as something that is nice in roots, that I would say did not exist in other organizations, that the sense of partnership was conditioned in the past on both taking the same steps, both having to agree to the same thing that they would do. So if it was dialogue, it would be only dialogue unless both sides agree to do differently. In the way that I'm experiencing my personal activism and my personal role, whether with Roots and others, I have space where I can come and converse with Israelis and settlers, specifically with Roots. But at the end of the day and the next morning, as a Palestinian, I go and participate in that nonviolent direct action. That is based on restorative justice. So yes, we can have a dialogue of restorative justice that will stay in the brain, which is amazing, will make our brains smarter. But if we don't take it as a practice on the ground, we're not creating that, we're not deepening that practice in people's life. You mentioned that we've enjoyed time, and I want to take the opportunity to talk about specifically the encounter that we met in. A couple of months ago, 5 months ago, there was a group of Jewish diaspora activists, some of them from the US and from other areas around the world, who came to the West Bank and to participate in a direct nonviolent action. And that nonviolent action was a work of coalition of Israelis and Palestinians together, a joint action. And when we were planning the action, we were thinking, what is the action going to be about? To break down a political statement. That's something that we've seen how it does not work out eventually. So we decided that it's going to be about that, restoring rights in action. And we, as a coalition, we went to an area where families were removed in 1998 from it. And as a coalition, we brought back the families and created a space, a safe space for the families to stay there. And we were faced by the army. First time and second time and third time. And we saw the success of what we are exploring right now as compassionate activism, not only non-violence, but compassionate non-violent activism. So yes, the dialogue might not lead to anywhere. It might create change on a brain level. But in reality, life as we know it, if we don't take that dialogue step forward into direct action, we will not move forward in anything. So I hope that answers your question.
Just to add a little bit, but not a lot. The first thing I'll say is awareness. Most Israelis, certainly most of my neighbors in the settlements, have no idea that there's such a thing as occupation, and the people live 5 minutes from us live with a lack of rights. To be aware of that is a constant struggle for me to be aware of it, and to make sure the other Israelis in Roots are aware of it. The second point is that some of the work we do, continuing what Antoine said, is not dialogue, just dialogue, it's action. Some of the work we do is to make life better for the Palestinians. Small things, not big things, small things. We have opened up channels of communication between local Israeli leaders like mayors and local Palestinian leaders, to have them work together to improve conditions for the Palestinians. We've opened up channels of dialogue. We've created the dialogue between local Palestinian mayors and the local army commanders. The army commanders are interested in listening, but they have no way to approach the Palestinians. The Palestinians want to make their grievances known, but have no way to reach the army or the civil administration, we facilitate those conversations, and we see positive things come of it. Little things, not the end of the occupation, not the final goal, but little things that make daily life better. So that's a hard question that I don't know the answer to. I really don't. But I can tell you the following. Ali Abu Awad, who's the Palestinian founder of Roots, sometimes speaks together with me in different forums. And we're asked that question. And Ali always says, Hanan, don't answer it. I'll answer it. And what Ali says is the following, that in 1948, the Israeli War of Independence, called by the Palestinians the Nakba, the tragedy, created about 600,000 Palestinian refugees who were uprooted from their homes. And those people and their descendants are suffering until today. One of the many reasons, not the only reason, one of the reasons why we don't have peace today is because we haven't found a solution to the refugee crisis. And then Ali says, if we are suffering today 70 years without peace, one of the reasons being those 600,000 Palestinian refugees, why would we think that creating 400,000 Jewish refugees today would create peace? 400,000 Jewish refugees today, even if you could get them to move, I assume there'd be a civil war in Israel and it would blow up in our faces. Let's say you could get them to move, they would be as bitter as the 600,000 Palestinian refugees from 1948 are bitter. And we wouldn't have a peace settlement. We'd have 400,000 people who are sniping at the peace settlement and are trying to, with terrorism or other matters, to undo it. So it just wouldn't work. But on the other hand, the Palestinians have to have their rights. What are we going to do with those settlements? So as I mentioned earlier, one possible solution is the two states, one homeland, is in which settlers stay in their homes, and as Israeli citizens, but within the Palestinian state. And I just want to say one more thing that's just so important to remember, and Antoine said it and I said it, but it has to be said again, that we're not going to reach peace by denying one side's identity. We're going to reach peace by legitimizing both sides' identity. And any type of two-state solution that removes 400,000 Israeli Jews is denying their identity. That's not going to work. Just like we cannot deny the identity of the Palestinians, including the 600,000 refugees from 1948. We don't want to deny anyone's identity. We want to try and find a way to validate and accept both identities at the same time, as hard as that may be. So I guess we're going to close now. And I would like to close with two short points. One is the following. We're coming here today to suggest to you that it's okay to be pro-Israel and it's okay to be pro-Palestine, but we're also asking you to be pro-solution. That's hard. We want to be a partisan of this side or that side. Be a partisan of both sides, and especially be a partisan of solution. I can tell you on my own side, so many partisans for Israel, sincere people who really have only the best intentions, don't realize that by being partisans of Israel, they're being anti-solution. They don't realize that. And from my limited perspective, it seems to me that so many good, honest people who are partisans for Palestine, supporters of Palestinian rights, don't realize that they're not being supporters of a solution. We're asking you to leave tonight with a perspective that the Israelis are right and the Palestinians are right and each have their legitimate rights, and we have to work for both of them at the same time for a solution. The second point is this. We think that you can help us. We want you to spread the word that there's a third way, the word we presented tonight. You can take the brochure. You could look at our website, friendsofroots.net. Don't go to friendsofroots.org. It'll get you to China to buy roots. And I know you might want to buy roots, but at this point we want you to buy peace and not roots. So it's friendsofroots.net. Look at the website, spread the word on social media. There's a way to sign up on our website for our 4-time-a-year newsletter. We won't send it more than 4 times a year, don't worry. I think email addresses were being taken for that. If you want to give your email address, that's fantastic. And I'll tell you that we love to have interns. There are many students in the room. If you want to come for 3 or 4 or 5 months or even longer to work with us on the ground, we can offer you no lodgings, no stipend, nothing except the opportunity to see amazing things happening before your eyes and to be part of those amazing things. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all again for coming, and I want to thank again Antoine and Hanan for being here. Like Hanan said, please put your emails if you're interested in getting more information on the sign-in sheet, and also a reminder that we are having, to continue this conversation, the Jewish Student Union is co-hosting with Students for Justice in Palestine an event this Tuesday at 5 o'clock to debrief and continue this conversation. So we hope to see you there, and thank you again for being here tonight.